as promised, we'll talk about academic skepticism. And I think it helps us think about some of the stuff as we move forward to like forms of local skepticism. But academic skepticism says that, okay, if you say that nobody knows anything, that's self-contradictory. Okay, well, this is what we, the academic skeptics, believe, that the only thing anyone knows is that no one knows everything. So we accept this one piece of knowledge that nobody knows anything, but beyond that, we're global skeptics. And that's the only thing that we know to be true is skepticism. So we're not contradicting ourselves anymore. So academic skepticism is sort of an ad hoc twist to avoid the problem of skepticism being self-contradictory. And while this may seem like a good move, it's actually not, because now the shoe's on the other foot, and now we're going to play the role of the skeptic and say, well, now wait a minute, how do you know that? And the problem with academic skepticism is they have no way of justifying how they know that one truth. How do you know that? You know? As a academic skeptic, you've denied all other sources of knowledge that you would use to back up your one thing you know. Because like if you use observation or reasoning or something like that, well, now all of a sudden you're trusting observation and reasoning. So the problem with academic skepticism is that it's arbitrary. It is a claim to know something arbitrarily. So the classical definition of knowledge goes like this: JTB, justification, truth, belief. Okay, so belief. For you to really know something, you have to believe it. That seems pretty obvious. Truth. For you to really know something, it has to actually be true. Obviously, if you claim to know it, but it wasn't true, then you didn't really know it. And then justification. How do you back up why you think it's true? You know, so if someone just guesses that it's going to rain tomorrow without any reason why, they just guess arbitrarily without any justification, and it does rain tomorrow, we would still say, well, you didn't know it was going to rain tomorrow, you were just a lucky guesser. Okay, so anyway, the point is, or maybe stop raining tomorrow, you know. The point is, if you don't have any justification for why you believe your one truth of academic skepticism, then anyone who doesn't want to believe it can just reject it, and what can you do against them? Furthermore, you run into other problems because there are an infinite number of things that a person can believe arbitrarily without justification. We could conceive of an infinite possibility of such things. And many of them are self-contradictory. So a classic example, it comes from the atheist philosopher named Bertrand Russell. And he just asked the question, what if there's a teapot on Mars? Or maybe it's orbiting the Earth in orbit. What if there's a teapot out there? A teapot on Mars. Do you have any reason to believe in the teapot? No. Can you prove that the teapot doesn't exist? No, we don't have a way to prove that the teapot's not there. So, is the teapot there? Well, I think we would all recognize that we shouldn't believe in the teapot without some justification for why we should believe in the teapot. Furthermore, there's an additional problem of like, you know, someone else could say like, well, there's no teapot there, there's a basketball on Mars. You know, or some other object. How do you know, you know, in other words, if Bertrand Russell says there's a teapot and there's no other object like that, and someone else says, no, there's not a teapot, there's a basketball, then they can't both be right. But if they are justified arbitrarily, then like they're both just, if you can, in other words, if you can know things to be true without any reason why you know them, then they would both have to be true, but they both can't be true. You know, just like the one cat or two cats scenario. Another problem with academic skepticism is there are entailed other truths that the academic skeptic claims to know, like I exist. If you claim to know something, you also claim to know that you exist and are the one knowing it. You know, so there's actually two. You know, and then it's like, well, how do you know you exist? And how do you know? And they're either going to justify those things or they're arbitrary. All right, so now that we've set that up, we can move forward to like local skepticism and different forms of local skepticism. Now, the main one we're going to focus on is what I'll call empirical skepticism, or maybe we can call it observational skepticism, where people doubt our ability to observe the exterior world. Remember the brain in the vat scenario, where you're really, a brain in a vat, a disembodied brain in a vat, and your brain is your nerve endings are all hooked to like little machines that like some sort of connector that like sends it the correct signal, and it's all run by a big computer so that everything you see is fake, Or another example would be something called the fishbowl problem, where we see the world, but there's some sort of distorting factor that distorts how we see the world, so we don't see it as it is. And like fish in a fishbowl. Some wonder about something like that when it comes to astronomy, because we're just sitting on Earth looking out all the time. So that's this observational skepticism. There's also ethical skepticism, where people either doubt that there are any truths about right and wrong and good and bad, or they doubt, or they're agnostic, and they just say, we don't think they may exist, but nobody knows if they exist. So that's a form of local skepticism. That we'll deal with in the videos on the moral argument for God's existence, because the second premise of the moral arguments for God's existence is objective moral values and duties exist, which is a direct denial of ethical skepticism. Okay. But with empirical skepticism, it's like, okay, yeah, we can a priori know all sorts of things logically, really an infinite number of things, like 1 doesn't equal 2, and 1 doesn't equal 3, and 1 doesn't equal 4, and 1 doesn't equal 5, and 6, and 7, all the way up to infinity. There's an infinity of truths that we could know, although none of us can really count to infinity. We can theoretically know in this a priori fashion. But there's much more that we would like to claim that we know. Like, when I look and see a bus coming down the road, I would like to think that I know that that bus is coming and that I shouldn't walk right now. So, what about this question? Well, what I'm going to do is take a look at, first of all, we'll take a look at the writings of the Christian philosopher of the 1600s named René Descartes. And we'll look at his approach to it just because I think it's interesting and fun for us. But then we'll take a closer look at what's called modern epistemology, the current debate, the current view on these things, the conclusions of modern epistemology. Anyway, with René Descartes was this Christian philosopher who set about on this skeptical experiment, where he was going to doubt everything and see what he could prove in a purely a priori fashion. And he went so far as even to doubt that his mind worked correctly. That he imagined maybe there was a demon that was messing up his mind, so that logical and mathematical truths were actually, he didn't know those. And that the issue there is like 3 does not equal 4. There's no way you could be tricked about that, because there's no chain of reasoning there for you to make a mistake. I think we've all done math problems where we thought we had the right answer. We look in the back of the book and we see that the answer's wrong. And we're so confident that our answer was correct that we decide the back of the book's wrong. And then we find out later from a friend or from the professor that, like, you were actually wrong. The back of the book was right. But, like, in the law of non-contradiction, you know, when someone says there are no true statements and this statement is true, you're just mentally observing two ideas there. There's, like, no way, I mean, you're just seeing them mentally. There's no chain of reasoning, so you can just see both of them before you at one time and tell what this one is and what that one is, and there's no way that they both can be true. One of them's wrong. So, like, there are no true statements, and it is true that there are no true statements, you know, or something like that. Or 3 equals 4. Okay, so, what Descartes did is he started, you know, with this question of, well, do I even exist? And then he arrived at this conclusion, which is famously being called cogito ergo sum, and his work is called the Cogito. And the specific part of his work is called the Cogito. I think, therefore I am. And his point was, if there was a demon deceiving me into thinking I exist, I would have to exist for the demon to do that. And that was the first contradiction that Descartes used to build his rational framework of knowledge. That if I didn't exist, since I believe I exist, that there must be a demon tricking me into believing I exist. And so, for me to not exist, I would have to exist to not exist. Because I would have to be tricked into believing that I exist. And so, it's a self-contradictory idea for me to not exist, so therefore I exist. I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. And then Descartes moved from there to make other moves rationally and argued other things until eventually he got at his own form of the ontological argument for God's existence, which we won't be covering in this series, but which is very interesting. He had his own form of it, and from there, once he got to God's existence, he said, okay, a good God would want me to exist in this world and would not deceive my senses, so therefore I can trust my senses, I can trust observations, I can trust sight, hearing, smell, touch, and those things. What's the other one? Vision, smell, taste. I forgot taste. And Descartes moved from there. The conclusion of modern epistemology is that Descartes put too high of a burden of proof on himself, and that you are rationally justified, in other words, without having such a strict way of proving things. In other words, the conclusion of modern epistemology is that you don't have to have 100% certainty to say that you have knowledge. 50-50 probability means I don't know, but anything on either side of that means that A is more likely than B, and therefore you're rationally justified in believing A instead of B. You know, so like the knowledge, you can know something, and the knowledge would still be falsifiable, but it doesn't mean you don't know. And so to understand this, we'll use the classic example from modern epistemology, which is the sheep and the farmer and you. You are walking down the road, and you out in a pasture, you see a sheep out in the field. And this causes you to form the belief that there is a sheep out there in the field. And you justify this belief on the basis of the fact that you see the sheep out in the field. But here comes the farmer. He walks up to you, and he says, and you know him to be an honest farmer, and a farmer who knows his fields well. And he says to you, at this distance, I have a sheep that is indistinguishable from a sheepdog, and you can't tell the difference. And it's the same amount of distance that it roughly is to what you previously believed to be a sheep. But now you have received something that's called an undercutting defeater. He didn't say that, oh, that's not a sheep out there. That would be a rebutting defeater. He just said something that would remove your justification. Because he said, oh, I have a sheepdog that looks just like a sheep at this distance. Okay? So, the question that comes up in modern epistemology is like, the classic example is like, all right, what if the farmer doesn't come up to you? It's always possible that he could have. What if he doesn't? And the thing is, there's every piece of observational knowledge in your life, there's always some sort of farmer-like scenario that could undercut your justification for believing in your observation. And at the very least, you've got the brain in the vat problem. So, the question becomes like, all right, what do I believe? And it's always possible. It's logically possible that the farmer, or something like the farmer, could come up to you in every situation in your life. And the brain in the vat issue problem is actually logically possible. Now, if the farmer came up to you and said that the number 3 equals the number 4, well, that's logically impossible. So we know that's not true. That's a priori knowledge. But what about a posteriori knowledge? What about the fact that you see the sheep out there? The question is, what if you look out there and see the sheep and form the belief that it's a sheep and justify it on the basis of your observations, and the farmer never comes up to you? You're like me, and I was driving home, and the Walmart in the small town I was driving away from, there was literally a pasture full of sheep behind it, and right behind the Walmart. And the thing about that is, no one's going to walk up to me and tell me that, oh, those aren't sheep, those are sheepdogs. Yeah. So, my point is, and the point of modern epistemology is like, how do you know, are you really justified in believing in the sheep on the basis of your eyesight, given that the farmer could come up to you? It's always logically possible that the farmer came up to you, but he didn't come up to you. But it's always logically possible. It's not logically impossible that the farmer would come up to you. He just didn't. And the conclusion of modern epistemology is that you are rationally justified in trusting your senses. And here's why. Logically possible defeaters come cheap. In other words, in this scenario, the justification is the fact that you see the sheep over there, but the farmer is what's called an undercutting defeater. He's a defeater for your justification. All right. The thing is, it's logically possible defeaters are always, they come cheap. They don't act. The farmer didn't actually come up to you. It's just possible he could have. That something like the farmer could have come up to you. And the thing is, justifications and defeaters come with different amounts of weight. And so, an example would be this. Let's say that you are accused of slashing someone's tires. And this is an example I borrowed from Alvin Plantinga. And you're accused of slashing someone's tires. And you, they bring you to trial. They have video evidence, but it's kind of far away, but it's someone that looks like you. Let's say that you've slashed a lot of people's tires in the past, so you're a known tire slasher, and you said you were going to slash this guy's tires. And there's witnesses who say they saw someone like you. You don't have an alibi for where you were. Then a jury would be rationally justified in finding you guilty, because the justification is strong enough that it's more likely that you did it than that you didn't. So you would be irrational to believe that you didn't do it and rational to believe that you did. But let's say that you, on the basis of your memory, believe that you were mountain climbing all day. So this is an example I borrowed from Alvin Plantinga, philosopher. The jury has no access to your memory, so they can't, they can't bring that into the court trial. But given that the jury is rationally justified, should you therefore believe what they believe and believe that you did it? No, because your memory carries more weight, it's a stronger justification. So the justification for your beliefs to count as knowledge does not have to be 100% certain. It just has to be more likely than not, okay? Or significantly more likely than not, given that, like 50.001% would be too close to call, right? Anyway, or let's say that the scenario played out differently and there were witnesses who were up close saw you, and there's video evidence up close where you can clearly see your face doing it. At that point, you would be rationally justified in doubting your memory, because that carries even more weight. Okay, so the thing about the farmer in our sheep and farmer example is that it's always logically possible the farmer could come up to you, but we can just make up a logically possible defeater. And, we can say that the classic example is the farmer's wife comes up to you and says, "Oh, don't trust Farmer Bob. He's heavily medicated today," or, he's suffering from Alzheimer's. It's starting to set in, And, so the farmer's wife becomes a defeater. But then we could come up with another logically possible defeater, like defeater, where someone comes up and says, "Oh, I'm Farmer Bob. That's my identical twin brother and his crazy wife. Don't listen to either of them. I'm Farmer Bob." So for every defeater, logically possible defeater, we can think up a defeater for that defeater. And so what this means is, what do you give more weight to? You're going to have to give more weight to what you actually see, as opposed to all of these literal infinity of possible defeaters, because they all cancel each other out. And they can't be given more weight than the fact that you see the sheep. So, basic epistemology here, you are rationally justified for trusting in for believing in the sheep because you saw the sheep, in the event that the farmer doesn't come up to you. So, the point to understand is, knowledge, for you to know something, you don't have to have 100% certain, unfalsifiable, undoubtable, indubitable, or even worse, infallible knowledge where it's impossible for you to be wrong. You can just have knowledge that's good enough to bring you way above 50-50, at which point you are rationally justified in holding the belief and you're irrational for rejecting it. Okay, so there's that. And if anyone rejects a belief, you've got good grounds on which to claim that they're wrong. Okay, so anyway, there you have it. I think that's everything we wanted to talk about in this video. I have no idea how long this went. I know with Proverbs and all that, it's just been basically an hour. So what we'll do is we'll stop there. I hope this video was helpful to some people, and it's one of those topics that you don't necessarily need to cover until you do, if someone decided to embrace skepticism. So we're talking about it. But have a lovely day. Thank you so much for your time.